The sun was just breaking over the Sierra foothills, painting Harper Evans' weathered ranch in streaks of gold and fire. Frost shimmered on the tall grass. Harper stood on her porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming her cold hands, eyes fixed on the endless Nevada horizon. "Another day," she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the pale morning, "and another list of worries." The mortgage was late again. Feed prices had doubled. Her old pickup was groaning for repairs, and the ghosts of her past, her late husband's laugh, her own dreams of a thriving sanctuary, lingered in every quiet corner. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought the morning light was playing tricks, but then, between two battered fence posts at the edge of her property, a shape materialized from the dawn. A horse, wild and impossibly proud, larger than any she'd ever seen. Muscles rippled beneath a coat the color of storm clouds, streaked with scars like lightning. His mane fell tangled and free, framing eyes that caught and held the sun. Sentinel. Even before she named him, the word echoed in her mind. Sentinel, guardian, legend. But it wasn't just the stallion that stunned her. Draped across his broad, scarred back, barely holding on, was a much smaller horse, a filly, limp and shivering, legs hanging awkwardly. Even from a distance, Harper could see the blood on her flank, the white star-shaped mark shining on her forehead. Harper's heart hammered in her chest. She set her coffee on the porch rail and started walking, slow and steady, every instinct screaming caution. Wild Mustangs didn't come this close to people, not unless they were desperate or driven. But Sentinel didn't move. He watched her, head high, ears twitching, muscles tense but still. Between them, the cold air crackled with something electric. Fear, challenge, hope. Closer now, Harper saw the filly's sides rising and falling in ragged gasps. She forced herself to stop 10 feet away, lowering her voice, hands open. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." She could see Sentinel's nostrils flare, his dark eyes calculating. The filly moaned, a sound so soft it barely carried. Harper knelt, moving as if through water, careful to keep her gaze low and her movements gentle. It was a standstill. Sentinel shifted, blocking her view of the filly for a moment, then slowly angled himself so Harper could see the wound on the filly's hind leg. Deep, ugly, still bleeding. The stallion pawed at the dirt once, as if daring Harper to make the wrong move. Harper's mind raced. If she lunged or tried to grab the filly, Sentinel would bolt or attack. But if she did nothing, the filly would die right here, under this wild guardian's watch. Harper breathed out, letting the morning air fill her lungs, and remembered every lesson from her years working with horses. Read the signs. Respect the line. Offer trust first. She reached into her jacket for a strip of jerky, holding it out, arm trembling. Sentinel eyed it, unmoving. The filly whimpered again. Harper shifted her weight, letting the tension flow out of her shoulders, trying to make herself as small and harmless as possible. Seconds dragged. Sentinel's gaze never wavered. At last, Harper laid the jerky on the frosted grass, sliding it closer inch by inch. The stallion stepped forward, head lowering. He sniffed, then with a sharp snort, nudged the filly as if urging her to move. The filly staggered but stayed where she was. Harper could see the life draining from her eyes. Time snapped. Harper made a decision. She crept closer, voice low. "I can help her, I promise." Sentinel tensed, every muscle coiled to explode. But as Harper reached the filly, her fingers brushing the blood-matted mane, the stallion stayed. He watched, every breath tight, but did not run. Harper examined the wound quickly, barbed wire maybe, or a mountain lion's claws. Infection had already set in, She pulled her old blue bandana from her pocket and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding, murmuring soft encouragement to the filly. Sentinel let out a sharp, warning whinny. Harper flinched but did not look away. Behind her, the ranch slowly woke. Chickens squawked, dogs barked, a distant truck rattled down the county road. But in this bubble of sunrise and breath, only Harper, Sentinel, and the orphaned filly existed. The world narrowed to the sound of the filly's labored breathing, the thunder in Harper's ears, and the stallion's silent promise, "I am here. I will not abandon her." Minutes passed. At last, Harper eased the filly off Sentinel's back. The stallion backed away one step, snorting but didn't flee. Harper lifted the filly, shockingly light, all legs and trembling skin, into her arms. The filly's head lolled against Harper's chest. The star-shaped mark pressed to her heart. Sentinel followed every step as Harper carried the filly into the old barn, his hooves crunching on the gravel. He stayed just beyond the open door, his silhouette framed in the golden light, mane blowing in the dawn wind. Harper laid the filly in a bed of fresh straw, fingers sticky with blood, eyes stinging with the effort not to cry. She glanced up. Sentinel stared back, silent, unmoving, a wild sentinel at the threshold. The connection was fragile, impossibly delicate, built on trust, desperation, and something Harper hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The sun climbed higher. Harper whispered, "You did good, big guy. Stay as long as you need." Sentinel dipped his head, almost in answer, and for the first time that year, Harper felt the edges of her fear begin to thaw. But she also knew this miracle dawn would not last. Trouble always found its way to her gate. And now, with a legendary wild stallion and an injured filly under her care, she could almost hear fate knocking, just beyond the light. Harper worked quickly in the dim light of the barn, the smell of hay and iodine sharp in the chilly air. The filly, whom she'd already started to call Star because of the bright white mark on her forehead, trembled in the nest of fresh straw. Her eyes were half-lidded, lashes stuck together with tears and dust. Harper's hands moved fast but gentle, cleaning the wound, checking for broken bones, wrapping the leg as best she could with strips torn from an old shirt. Sentinel's massive head loomed in the open doorway, watching every move, breath steaming in the morning chill. She risked a glance outside. Sentinel hadn't moved. He stood, muscles tight, ears flicking to every sound. Harper could sense his worry, no, his fierce devotion. She whispered softly to Star, brushing sweat from the filly's neck, "You're safe now, little one. I promise." But even as she spoke, anxiety chewed at her. Word traveled fast out here. A wild Mustang, especially one as striking as Sentinel, was a legend. One some folks would pay to turn into a trophy or a payday. She hurried to her old landline and dialed Dr. Sienna Lowe, the only vet for 50 miles she truly trusted. "Sienna, it's Harper. I need you. Bad. I've got a filly in rough shape and a wild stallion standing guard. Bring your kit. Now." Sienna's voice on the other end was calm, but Harper could hear the edge of urgency. "I'm on my way. Lock the gate if you can. You know how it is." Harper returned to the barn, but Sentinel's posture shifted. Ears pinned, head raised, eyes wild. Harper followed his gaze and froze. Out by the main road, a battered Chevy truck rattled to a stop, spitting gravel. 4 men spilled out, boots crunching the frost, wide-brimmed hats casting shadows over hard faces. Wranglers. Harper recognized one of them, Billy Tate, known for catching wild Mustangs and selling them to rodeos and out-of-state buyers. Her stomach turned cold. "Morning, Harper," Billy called, voice too friendly, his eyes fixed on Sentinel. "That's one hell of a horse you got there. Didn't think you were running a circus." The others fanned out, hands on hips, eyes flicking between Sentinel and the barn. Harper stepped forward, planting herself between the men and the stallion. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice even. "This is private property. You need to turn around and leave, now." Billy smirked, glancing at his friends. "Come on, Harper. We both know that Mustang don't belong to nobody. Tell you what, I'll give you 200 cash, no questions asked, and we'll take him off your hands, quick and easy." The others chuckled, spreading out in a half circle. Sentinel's ears flattened. He pawed the dirt, muscles rippling. Harper could see the panic building in his eyes, the memory of snares, of fences closing in. She didn't flinch. "Not happening. He's not for sale, and neither is any horse on this land. You come any closer, and I'll call the sheriff." Billy's grin faded. His voice grew sharp. "That horse is a menace, Harper. He's wild, dangerous. What if he hurts somebody, hurts you? Don't be stupid. Just move aside." Sentinel stamped, snorting, body trembling with tension. Harper knew one wrong move could send him fleeing, or worse, could provoke him to charge. She stood her ground. "You heard me. Get off my land, now." The wranglers hesitated, sizing her up, glancing nervously at the stallion. For a moment, time stretched thin as wire. Then Billy's tone shifted, ugly and low. "Don't say we didn't warn you, Harper. Folks are talking. You keep harboring wild animals. Someone's gonna get hurt. And it won't be us." He spat on the ground, gave a sharp whistle, and the men backed toward their truck. But Harper didn't relax. She watched them go, feeling their eyes on her, the promise of trouble hanging heavy in the air. As the truck roared away, Sentinel tossed his head, letting out a long, low whinny, a sound that shook Harper to her bones. She turned, meeting the stallion's gaze. For the first time, he took a hesitant step closer, as if understanding she'd chosen his side. She felt a strange, fierce pride rise in her chest. Not just for Sentinel, but for herself, standing up, refusing to let fear drive her decisions anymore. She turned back to the barn. Star was still breathing, but her breaths were ragged, the wound seeping blood through the makeshift bandage. Sentinel poked his head through the open door, eyes softening at the sight of the filly. Harper reached out, brushing his nose with trembling fingers. "It's okay, big guy. I won't let them take you. You or her." Minutes later, Sienna's truck pulled in, tires squealing on the gravel. The vet was out before the engine died, her bag slung over one shoulder. She took one look at Sentinel, her eyes wide, and then got to work on Star, barely blinking as Harper filled her in. Sentinel stayed nearby, tense but trusting, never letting Star out of his sight. By the time the sun crested fully over the hills, Harper, Sienna, Sentinel, and Star were safe. Shaken, but together. The threat of the wranglers lingered like a shadow, but Harper knew something fundamental had shifted. Sentinel had chosen to trust her. She'd chosen to fight for him. And as Sienna bandaged Star's leg and Sentinel nuzzled his filly, Harper realized she wasn't just fighting for her ranch anymore. She was fighting for something wild, something sacred, something worth every risk. But deep in her gut, she also knew this was just the beginning. Trouble would be back. And next time, it might not wait until dawn. The chaos of the morning faded as the ranch settled into an uneasy calm. Harper stood at the edge of the barn, watching Sienna finish tending to Star. The little filly looked impossibly fragile, her legs swaddled in clean bandages, her coat dull from shock and blood loss. Sienna checked her vitals, eyes sharp beneath her ball cap, voice quiet as she murmured updates to Harper. The good news? Star would live, if infection didn't set in. The bad news? She would need constant care, rest, and gentle hands. The filly's fate balanced on a razor's edge. Sentinel stood just outside, head low, eyes fixed on Star. He had not left the barn's shadow since the incident with the wranglers. Harper could feel the weight of his gaze on her with every step. Most wild stallions would have fled after the confrontation, but Sentinel was different. Every move he made spoke of fierce intelligence. Something in the way he watched, calculating, never quite at ease but unwilling to leave his filly's side. Harper kept her movements slow, her voice steady and soft. She changed Star's water, offered the filly a mix of soaked hay and oats, and sang old lullabies under her breath, songs she once sang to her daughter before the world turned upside down. The barn filled with sunlight as the day wore on, dappling the dust and straw with warm golden patterns. Harper lost herself in the rhythm of care, checking the filly's temperature, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement every time Star tried to stand. Each small triumph, a flick of Star's ear, a hesitant nuzzle, the way she pressed her nose into Harper's palm, felt monumental. Sienna came and went, leaving supplies, promising to return the next day. The outside world shrank away, replaced by the steady pulse of hope and fear. Through it all, Sentinel kept his vigil. At first, Harper was wary, never turning her back on him, always respecting the space between them. But as hours passed, Sentinel's wariness shifted. He watched Harper as she cared for Star. Sometimes he'd nick her softly, nudging a stray tool or bucket closer with his nose. Once, as dusk crept into the barn, Harper saw Sentinel chase away a curious coyote, stamping and snorting until the intruder melted back into the sagebrush. Night fell cold and blue across the Nevada hills. Harper bedded down on a cot in the tack room, door cracked so she could hear every sound from the barn. Sentinel circled the perimeter, pausing now and then to peer through the half-open door. In those quiet hours, Harper found herself talking to him, words tumbling out into the darkness. "I know what it's like to lose everything, to have nowhere left to run. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe we can help each other." The wind rattled the roof, and for a while only the soft snuffling of horses and the low hum of crickets filled the silence. Harper drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by dreams of barbed wire, stormy skies, and a wild horse's burning eyes. Dawn broke soft and pink. Harper woke to the gentle sound of Sentinel nuzzling Star through the stall slats. The filly had managed to stand, shaky but determined, reaching for the bucket of hay with trembling lips. Harper's heart swelled. She moved quietly, checking the wound, praising Star for her strength. Sentinel watched, ears flicking, muscles taut but no longer braced to flee. After feeding the other rescues, a blind Appaloosa named Daisy, a mule with a twisted ear, and a retired police horse with scars of his own, Harper returned to the barn. To her surprise, Sentinel was gone. Panic spiked. Had he finally abandoned Star? But before she could call out, she spotted him at the edge of the property, driving off a pair of stray dogs with a flurry of kicks and sharp cries. Harper laughed, relief crashing over her. She realized then, Sentinel wasn't just protecting Star. He was keeping watch over the whole ranch, her rescues included. When he returned, Sentinel circled the barn, checking on each horse with a nudge or a whinny. The other animals seemed to sense his presence, nervous at first, but gradually accepting him into their ranks. Even old Daisy, usually stubborn and solitary, allowed Sentinel to share her water trough. The next few days unfolded in a pattern of tension and peace. Harper and Sienna worked side by side, cleaning Star's wound, massaging her legs, coaxing her to eat. Sentinel stood sentinel, always within sight, sometimes peering through the windows, sometimes dozing in the shade of a cottonwood. Harper began to talk to him as she worked, sharing her worries, her hopes, stories of the ranch before her husband's accident, before the debt and the loneliness. She was surprised by how much comfort she found in the silent company of the Mustang. There were moments of fear, the distant howl of coyotes at night, the roar of an engine on the road. But there were gentle moments, too. Harper catching Sentinel gently nudging Star awake for breakfast, the filly nuzzling Harper's shoulder, Daisy standing watch at the barn door like an old guardian. One night, as a thunderstorm rumbled over the hills, Harper lit an old lantern and sat with Star, listening to rain drum the roof. Sentinel stood just outside, water streaming down his back, refusing to seek shelter. Harper moved to the door, holding out her hand. "Come on, you stubborn old soul, get inside." For a moment, Sentinel hesitated, wild pride warring with his need for Star. Then, with a snort, he stepped into the barn, shaking water everywhere. Harper laughed, her heart light for the first time in months. She realized then, these quiet hours of recovery, the slow building of trust, were as important as any battle. In the hush between storms, between heartbeats, something new was taking root. Not just survival, but the beginnings of family. Harper looked at Star and Sentinel, and for the first time in a long time, dared to hope for tomorrow. The weeks that followed passed in a slow rhythm, gentle, steady, yet forever tinged with tension, like the hush before a summer storm. Harper rose early every morning, sometimes before the sun, and each time she found Sentinel already awake, standing watch outside the barn. Sometimes she would catch him scanning the horizon with sharp, knowing eyes, as if reading the world for threats and hidden dangers. He seemed to sense things before they happened. She'd never met a horse quite like him. Star, her wound healing, grew stronger by the day. The first time she managed to limp to the water trough, Sentinel was there beside her, guiding her every step, his nose nudging her gently when she hesitated. If the little filly stumbled, he circled her, blocking the other horses until she found her footing again. When Daisy, the blind Appaloosa, wandered too close, Sentinel placed himself between Star and Daisy's searching hooves, protective but never aggressive. Harper watched it all, amazed. One afternoon, as Sienna finished checking Star's stitches, she pulled Harper aside, keeping her voice low. "That's not normal horse behavior, Harper," Sienna said, glancing at Sentinel, who grazed nearby, ears trained on every word. "It's like he knows exactly what Star needs, and what you're about to do before you do it." Harper nodded, folding her arms, her eyes distant. "He's more than just smart. He's aware, like he's listening, like he's trying to teach us something." It wasn't just wishful thinking. Sentinel seemed to anticipate problems before they arose. If the wind shifted and brought the scent of coyotes, he'd stand between the barn and the open pasture, alert. If one of the rescue horses limped or staggered, Sentinel would lead it to the water, or stand nearby until Harper came to help. Word of the remarkable Mustang spread, first through whispers in the feed store, then in text messages and photos shared by neighbors. A curious neighbor, Mrs. Mendez, drove by with her son just to catch a glimpse. "Harper, I saw him chase off a hawk from the chicken run," she exclaimed one morning. Harper smiled, but the attention made her uneasy. Sentinel's legend was growing, and not everyone saw it as a good thing. To distract herself, Harper kept careful records of Sentinel's behavior. She started jotting notes in a weathered notebook. Sentinel led Star to water again, used body to shield from others, signaled with soft whinny before approaching me, drove stray dogs off with sharp charge but never hurt them. The more she wrote, the more amazed she became. One evening, Dr. Sienna brought over her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a clip she'd uploaded to a horse rescue group online. The video showed Sentinel teaching the other rescues, leading them in a single line from the barn to the far paddock, pausing every so often to let the slowest catch up. Comments flooded in, some awed, some skeptical, others calling Sentinel a freak or a hoax. The next day, 2 men showed up at the gate, local ranchers Harper barely knew. "We saw your Mustang online," the older one said. "Thought we'd see the legend for ourselves. Any horse that smart's got to be worth something." Harper stiffened. "He's not for sale, and this isn't a show. If you want to talk, you can do it from the road." The ranchers didn't argue, but their stares lingered. Harper felt the pressure of eyes on her land long after their truck rumbled away. That night, Harper sat on the porch, watching the stars flicker into life above the silent ranch. Sentinel stood at the edge of the barn, a shadow in the moonlight, Star sleeping beside him. Harper's notebook rested on her lap, half filled with observations. She wondered if people would ever believe what she'd seen, a wild Mustang who seemed to think like a person, who cared for the weak and understood the sick. Or would they just see a wild animal, a trophy, a threat? As days passed, Sentinel's feats continued to amaze. He learned how to open the heavy gate to the north pasture by lifting the latch with his teeth. He led the other horses to the creek just before a thunderstorm hit, seeking higher ground, as if he could sense the change in air pressure. More than once, Harper watched him tell her when Star needed water. He would paw at the trough, then look back at her until she followed. But the attention also brought friction. Some neighbors, impressed, stopped by to offer supplies or just to see the horses. Others, led by Billy Tate, made their doubts known. Harper overheard angry voices at the gas station. Folks worried that a wild stallion, no matter how special, could spell trouble for livestock or children. One morning, a letter arrived. Anonymous, hand-scrawled. "Keep your wild horses away from our land. If anything happens to our cattle, we know who to blame." Harper crumpled the note, heart pounding. She refused to be bullied, but the threat lingered. That night, rain hammered the roof. Harper lay awake, listening to the storm, feeling the weight of her choices. Sentinel had brought hope and healing, but also uncertainty and danger. Yet as she drifted to sleep, she thought of his steady gaze, the way he shielded Star, the subtle acts of kindness no camera could catch. Family, she realized, isn't just blood. It's trust. It's choosing to protect, to believe even when others don't understand. The storm eased. Harper rose before dawn and stepped outside. Sentinel greeted her with a quiet nicker. Star pressed close to his side, healthy and strong. As the sun climbed, painting the world new again, Harper felt a fragile optimism, something worth fighting for, something wild and rare, that could change not just her ranch, but her heart, and maybe the whole world beyond the fence. The days of cautious hope began to unravel, little by little, as the word spread further than Harper could control. It started with a news van at the end of her dusty road, just a local channel, but their footage of Sentinel and Star was picked up online. Suddenly, the whole world seemed to know about the wild stallion and the filly with the star on her forehead. Comments flooded in, some awed and supportive, others suspicious or openly hostile. Harper stopped reading them after the third sleepless night. She tried to keep life on the ranch normal. The old routines continued, feeding the horses, changing Star's bandages, walking the fence line, talking quietly with Sienna about wound care and recovery. But now she did it all with one eye always on the tree line, the driveway, the sky above. Sometimes she caught Sentinel staring in the same direction, his ears swiveling, nostrils flaring at the faintest scent of trouble. Their mutual vigilance became a silent pact. The first real sign of danger came on a cloudless afternoon. Harper was filling water troughs when a set of unfamiliar trucks pulled up just outside the main gate. 4 men climbed out, boots raising puffs of dust, hats pulled low against the sun. 2 of them carried binoculars. The other 2 openly carried rifles. Harper's chest tightened as she recognized the logo on the door. Silver Ridge Ranch, run by the stubborn and greedy Robert Kane, who had always seen wild Mustangs as nothing but pests or profit. Robert himself swaggered up to the gate, chewing a toothpick. "Heard you're playing nursemaid to a wild stallion," he called, not bothering with a greeting. "Figure you ought to let the professionals handle it. That animal belongs to the land, not you. He's costing us money, spooking our herds, trampling fences." His tone left no room for misunderstanding. Harper crossed her arms, blocking the entrance. "Sentinel and Star are here because they need help. This is private land, and you're not welcome. You want to talk? You can call the sheriff. Otherwise, you're trespassing." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Just remember, accidents happen. Wouldn't want a wild horse to end up shot because he wandered onto the wrong side of a fence." The threat was as cold as the wind through the mountains. Harper didn't flinch. "If anything happens to my horses, I'll know where to look first." Robert grinned, mean and slow, then tipped his hat and turned back to his men. The group climbed into their trucks and roared away. But Harper's hands shook for a long time after. She didn't realize Sentinel had crept up behind her until she turned and nearly bumped into his chest. The stallion snorted, lowering his head until it brushed her shoulder, as if to say, "I'm still here." She rested her hand on his neck, grateful for the warmth and the comfort. That night, Harper called an emergency meeting of her closest neighbors, people she trusted, like Mrs. Mendez, the older rancher Harry Brooks, and a few others. They crowded into her kitchen, drinking bitter coffee and talking in hushed voices. "You need a watch," Harry said. "Trail cameras, motion sensors, locks on every gate. Kane's men won't let this go." "I can take a few nights," Mrs. Mendez volunteered, determination hardening her features. "If anyone messes with those horses, they'll answer to all of us." Sienna agreed to stay on the ranch for a few days, bunking in the tack room with her medical bag. Harper and Sienna spent the next morning stringing up extra lights and installing 2 battered trail cameras borrowed from Harry's shed. All the while, Sentinel kept watch, never straying far from Star, who was still regaining her strength. As dusk fell, Harper sat on the porch with Sienna, listening to the crickets and the creak of the windmill. "You think we're ready for them?" Harper asked, voice barely a whisper. Sienna shrugged. "As ready as we'll ever be. Just don't underestimate desperate men or greedy ones." Harper nodded, feeling the weight of every shadow in the yard. The first attack came that night. Around midnight, the horses erupted in panicked cries, hooves pounding against stall walls. Harper and Sienna bolted from their beds, grabbing flashlights and running into the blackness. Sentinel was already out in the yard, rearing and screaming, his silhouette terrifying against the moonlit sky. Star was huddled in the corner of the paddock, eyes wild with terror. At the far fence, figures in dark clothes moved fast, clipping the wire, trying to cut an opening wide enough to drive Sentinel out. A rifle gleamed in one man's hands. Harper shouted, "Hey!" her voice cracking the night like a gunshot. Sienna was already on her phone, calling the sheriff, breathless and angry. One of the intruders lunged at Sentinel, swinging a rope. The stallion exploded forward, driving the man back with a flurry of kicks. Another tossed a rock, striking Harper in the shoulder. Pain blossomed, sharp and immediate, but she kept moving, shouting for help. Dogs barked in the distance. Lights flicked on at Harry's ranch next door. Within minutes, neighbors were running across the field with flashlights and bats. The poachers panicked, dropping the wire cutters and sprinting for the trees. Harper collapsed to her knees beside Star, whispering soothing words as the filly trembled violently. Sentinel circled them both, sweat shining on his coat, chest heaving as he scanned the darkness for new threats. The aftermath was chaos, flashing red and blue lights, sheriff's deputies combing the property, neighbors exchanging stories and hot coffee in the kitchen. The fence was a mess. The horses spooked, but no one was seriously hurt. As dawn painted the sky with pale fire, Harper sat with Star and Sentinel in the barn. The adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion and gratitude. Sentinel pressed his nose into her palm. Harper closed her eyes. "You saved us, big guy. All of us, I promise. I won't let them win." But she knew this was just the beginning. The real fight for the sanctuary and for the wild souls it sheltered had only just begun. The memory of the attack left the whole ranch on edge. For days, the horses were skittish, shying at every gust of wind or creak of the old barn. Harper's shoulder throbbed from the bruise where the rock had struck her, but she ignored the pain, refusing to let it slow her down. She walked the fence line every morning and every evening, flashlight in hand even after the sun went down, eyes hunting for new footprints, broken wire, any sign of trespassers. Sienna stayed on, sleeping in the tack room, phone charged and ready, her presence a comfort Harper hadn't realized she'd needed. But beneath the exhaustion and fear, a fierce determination had begun to grow. Harper refused to be bullied off her land or give up on the animals who needed her most. Every day, she found new ways to fortify the ranch, patching fences, hanging tin cans and bells, reinforcing the barn door with old planks and stubborn resolve. Mrs. Mendez and Harry Brooks stopped by regularly, sometimes bringing groceries or extra feed, sometimes just walking the grounds with Harper and sharing quiet words in the dusk. More neighbors offered help, a silent message that Harper and her horses were not alone. Sentinel never let his guard down. He slept standing at the barn's open door, muscles taut, ears flicking at every distant noise. He moved with Star from paddock to paddock, her shadow, her guardian, never farther than a few steps. When Harper caught him in the moonlight, he looked like a statue cast from shadow and wild will, a legend made real. The sight gave her strength. The attacks, though, had left scars deeper than any visible wound. Some of the rescue horses, especially Daisy and the old police gelding, grew nervous when strangers approached. Even Star startled easily, shying from loud noises or sudden movements. Harper spent hours each day reassuring them, her hands gentle, her voice low. Sienna tried her best to distract Harper from her worries, telling stories from her vet rounds, but anxiety crept into every corner of Harper's life. One night, a storm rolled across the valley, the sky bruised and trembling with thunder. The wind howled, rain lashing the roof and turning the yard into a patchwork of puddles and shadows. Harper tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Every crash of thunder made her startle awake, heart pounding. The clock glowed 1:34 a.m. when a sharp clang split the storm's roar, the unmistakable sound of the far gate swinging open. Harper shot out of bed, grabbing her flashlight and pulling on her boots with shaking hands. Sienna met her in the hall, phone already dialing the sheriff, eyes wide with fear and anger. "Stay behind me," Harper ordered, but Sienna shook her head, refusing to leave her friend's side. Together they dashed into the storm, the flashlight's beam jittering across the flooded yard. In the chaos of wind and rain, it was hard to see, but the horses' cries rang out, panic and warning. Sentinel was already moving, charging across the pasture, his silhouette a flash of power against the lightning. Harper could see dark figures near the far fence. 3, maybe 4 men, faces masked, one carrying what looked like a tranquilizer gun. Harper's instincts took over. She whistled sharp and loud, the signal she'd always used to call the herd. Through the rain, Daisy and the others responded, bolting toward the barn. Star hesitated, fear rooting her to the mud, but Sentinel swung around, nudging her, driving her forward. The two moved as one, with Sentinel pushing Star and snapping at the heels of the slower rescues, herding them through the storm toward the safety of the barn. One of the intruders aimed the tranquilizer at Sentinel, but Harper was faster. She hurled her flashlight with all her strength, the heavy metal smacking the man's wrist. The dart fired wide, hissing into the mud. "Get off my land!" Harper screamed, her voice raw. "The sheriff's on his way!" Another man lunged at Sentinel, swinging a length of rope. The stallion reared, hooves lashing out, a streak of lightning illuminating his fury. The man stumbled back, falling into the mud, the rope slipping from his hands. Sienna was on the phone, shouting their location, her voice barely audible over the wind. Harper ran to the barn, flinging open the door as Star and the rest of the herd galloped in. Daisy nearly skidding across the slick floor, she slammed the door and dropped the heavy plank across it, breath ragged in her throat. Through the storm, she could see Sentinel outside, circling, eyes wild, daring anyone to come closer. The poachers, realizing they were losing control, shouted curses and threats as they tried to corner Sentinel, but the stallion was too fast, too smart. He feinted left, then exploded to the right, dodging another rope and sending one man tumbling into the electric fence. Sparks flew. The man howled, scrambling away as his friends dragged him back toward the fence line. Red and blue lights flashed at the end of the driveway. The sheriff and 2 deputies, guns drawn, shouting orders. The poachers scattered, melting into the darkness. Sentinel, his chest heaving, circled once more before trotting back to the barn, mane plastered to his neck with rain, eyes bright with victory. Harper fell to her knees in the mud, shaking with relief as the deputies swept the property. Sienna knelt beside her, hugging her tight. "You did it," Sienna whispered. "You and that horse. You saved them all." Sentinel stepped inside at last, shaking water everywhere, his body battered but proud. Star pressed against his side, her eyes wide but trusting. The other rescues gathered close, forming a living wall of protection and gratitude around their wild protector. As the sheriff finished his report and promised extra patrols, Harper sat in the straw, Sentinel's great head resting in her lap. The barn glowed with lamplight and hope, even as the storm raged outside. Harper stroked Sentinel's mane, whispering, "You're not just a legend anymore. You're family. We stand together, no matter what comes next." For the first time since the trouble started, Harper allowed herself to believe. The worst had passed, for now. But her fight for the sanctuary and for Sentinel and Star was far from over. Outside, dawn broke with a promise. As long as they stood together, they could survive anything. The days after the standoff blended together in a haze of exhaustion, gratitude, and gnawing worry. The ranch was alive with neighbors and law enforcement for a few sunrises, but as quickly as they'd come, the help and the sirens faded away. Harper felt every ache in her body, but she kept moving, feeding the horses, checking the battered fence, thanking the folks who stopped by with warm casseroles and quiet encouragement. Yet beneath her stubborn resolve, a new dread gnawed at her heart. Sentinel was not himself. The stormy night and the violence had taken their toll. Harper noticed the limp first, slight but unmistakable, when Sentinel shifted his weight to keep Star close or circled the paddock to check the perimeter. Then she saw the blood, a thin, rusty line running from his shoulder down his leg. She tried to approach, but Sentinel, proud as always, pulled away, hiding his pain behind a glare and a stamp of his hoof. Sienna saw it too. "He's hurt worse than he lets on," she said, watching Sentinel from the barn doorway. "Stallions like him, they don't show weakness unless it's bad. We need to get a closer look." That afternoon, Harper, Sienna, and Mrs. Mendez, who'd come by with a basket of cornbread, worked together to corner Sentinel in the smaller round pen. It took an hour, 3 grown women, a bucket of oats, and more patience than Harper thought she still had. Finally, Sentinel relented, letting Sienna examine him as Harper stroked his mane, whispering calm encouragement. Sienna's face was grim as she peeled back the matted hair to reveal a gash deep in the muscle, a torn patch of flesh that was already hot with infection. "He needs stitches, antibiotics, maybe even surgery," Sienna said, packing her bag with trembling hands. "We can't do it here, not without the right tools. Harper, you'll have to take him to the animal hospital in Reno." The idea felt impossible. The ranch's finances were already stretched to the breaking point. The last bill from the feed store was still unpaid, and Harper's account at the local co-op was deep in the red. The hospital fees alone would be more than she earned in a month. And there was another problem. How would she ever get a wild Mustang, who barely tolerated a halter, into a trailer for the long, terrifying drive? Harper sat on the porch that evening, watching Sentinel limp after Star, the filly pressing her nose gently to his injured side. The air buzzed with mosquitoes, the horizon smeared with gold and purple as the sun set behind the distant hills. She felt trapped. Every option weighed with heartbreak. If she did nothing, Sentinel might not survive the infection. If she pushed him too far, she could lose his trust, lose the fragile miracle that had started to heal them all. That night, Harper barely slept. She turned over numbers in her head, counted what little cash she had, and scribbled a desperate list of people she could call for help. Outside, Sentinel stood watch at the barn door, head low, eyes full of pain, but still burning with a stubborn will to protect. Morning brought no answers, only a thick fog of uncertainty. Sienna arrived early, coffee in hand, and found Harper feeding Star. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Sienna said quietly, looking out across the misty paddock. "People want to help. Let them." Word of Sentinel's injury spread, carried on the grapevine of rural Nevada faster than wildfire. Some neighbors were quick to offer support. One left a box of medical supplies at the gate. Another brought hay and apples. Mrs. Mendez started a fundraising page online, posting photos of Sentinel and Star. The donations came slowly at first, then picked up speed as Harper's story was shared and reshared. The battle to save a wild Mustang. The cost of compassion in a world too quick to turn away. But not everyone was on her side. A local rancher cornered Harper at the feed store, voice dripping with disdain. "You're wasting your time and money, Evans. That horse is a danger. You ought to put him down before someone really gets hurt." Harper stood her ground, fighting the urge to lash out. "Sentinel isn't just some wild animal. He saved lives. He deserves a chance." The words tasted like hope and defiance and fear, all tangled together. Back at the ranch, Sentinel grew weaker. The infection spread fast. Harper and Sienna did all they could, cleaning the wound, changing dressings, fighting Sentinel's pride at every turn. Star barely left his side, her once playful energy subdued as she nuzzled and watched over him. The other rescue horses grew solemn, sensing the tension in the air. One night, as rain drummed the tin roof, Harper sat in the barn, Sentinel's head in her lap. She stroked his tangled mane, whispering every promise she could muster. "You're not alone. I won't give up. Not now. Not after everything we've been through." When Sienna came in, she found Harper still there, eyes raw with grief and determination. "The hospital's expecting us tomorrow," Sienna said softly. "We'll make it work. You have more friends than you think." The next morning, Harper rallied her allies. Harry arrived with his old horse trailer. Mrs. Mendez and her son brought apples and gentle hands. It took hours, gentle patience, and the quiet presence of Star for Sentinel to finally step into the trailer, quivering with fear and pain, but trusting the people around him. As they pulled away from the ranch, Harper looked back through watery eyes, seeing the other rescues lined up at the fence, watching the journey begin. She squeezed Sienna's hand, hope and fear warring in her chest. She didn't know if Sentinel would make it. She didn't know if the ranch would survive the debt, the threats, the heartache. But she knew this. The cost of compassion was steep, but worth every sacrifice. Because sometimes, the only way to save what matters most is to risk everything you have. The drive to Reno was a trial in itself. The old horse trailer rattled and groaned as Harry guided his truck over rain-slicked roads. Sentinel stood inside, trembling, head lowered but eyes alert, Star's scent lingering on the borrowed blanket that Harper had tucked into the stall. Harper rode in the back seat, hands clenched, silent prayers passing her lips every mile. Sienna kept checking her supplies, bandages, syringes, a bottle of penicillin, ready for anything. The miles seemed endless. The landscape nothing but gray, sodden emptiness, and the distant promise of hope. At the animal hospital, the staff was waiting. They moved fast. Sentinel's limp was worsening, his coat slick with sweat, eyes cloudy with pain. Sedation was a risk, but Sienna's presence seemed to calm him enough for the team to work. Harper watched from the window as they scrubbed the wound, stitched torn flesh, flushed the infection, and started a steady drip of antibiotics. She pressed her forehead to the glass, every muscle tensed, reliving every terrible second of the last few weeks. It felt like forever before Sienna emerged, her scrubs stained, her expression tired but hopeful. "He's tough," Sienna said, managing a weak smile. "It'll be days before we know for sure, but if any horse can make it, it's him." Harper stayed at the hospital for 2 nights, curled up on the bench in the visitors' lounge, refusing to leave Sentinel alone. She texted updates to Mrs. Mendez, who promised to check on the other rescues and bring Star fresh hay. Donations began to trickle in from across Nevada, small amounts, a few dollars at a time, but enough to keep hope alive. People from as far as California sent messages of support. "Rooting for your Mustang. He deserves a second chance. We need more sanctuaries like yours." On the 3rd morning, Sentinel stood on shaky legs when Harper entered the stall, ears flicking at her voice. She laughed, brushing tears away. "You stubborn thing. I knew you'd pull through." She didn't care that her clothes were wrinkled, or that her hair was a mess. All that mattered was the slow, determined spark in Sentinel's eyes. When it was finally time to go home, Harry arrived with the trailer. Mrs. Mendez brought a homemade pie, and Sienna handled the paperwork. Sentinel walked into the trailer more willingly this time, the memory of his pain giving way to a cautious trust. The trip back was easier. The air smelled of sage and rain, the sky scrubbed clean. Star met them at the gate, her whinny shrill with excitement. She pressed close to Sentinel, nose to nose, as if sharing her own wordless tale of survival. Back at the ranch, Harper realized things couldn't go back to the way they'd been. Too much had changed. Her heart, her resolve, even the ranch itself. She sat with Sienna on the porch that first night home, listening to the horses graze. "I can't keep pretending this place is just mine," Harper said, her voice quiet but certain. "We need to make it a real sanctuary, for wild horses, for the ones no one else wants." Sienna grinned. "You know, people will come. Volunteers, students, maybe even tourists. Sentinel's story is already bigger than this ranch." Word spread fast, and before long, volunteers began to arrive. The first was a retired teacher who loved horses, then a college student with a knack for carpentry, then a whole 4-H club offering their hands and their hearts. Mrs. Mendez organized the feed shed. Harry mended the east fence. Sienna wrote up care plans for every animal, posting charts on the tack room wall. Harper taught newcomers how to gentle a frightened rescue or clean a stubborn wound. There were hard days when the bills still loomed, or when an old injury flared up in one of the rescues. But Harper found herself laughing more, sleeping better, and waking with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Sentinel recovered slowly but surely, his limp fading, his coat regaining its shine. He spent more time with the herd, teaching the new arrivals how to trust, how to move together, how to survive. Star became a symbol of the sanctuary, her white star shining bright against the Nevada blue. Children visiting with their families would sketch her in notebooks or feed her from their palms, awestruck by the closeness of the wild. Harper gave tours, telling Sentinel and Star's story to anyone who would listen. "This ranch is a second chance for all of us," she'd say, watching as volunteers brushed down a trembling mule or built new stalls from reclaimed wood. Not just for the horses, but for everyone who walks through that gate. The local newspaper ran a feature, "Harper's Sanctuary, where the wild still runs." Donations increased. A group of school kids sent handmade thank you cards. Even the county commissioner stopped by, shaking Harper's hand and promising to look into better wild horse protections. But the best moments came late at night, after the volunteers went home and the fields fell quiet. Harper would find Sentinel standing watch under the stars, Star at his side. The other rescues gathered close. She'd lean against the fence, breathing in the cool night air, feeling her burdens grow lighter. She knew challenges would come. Storms, bills, maybe more threats from those who didn't understand. But for now, the ranch was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a sanctuary, a place where broken things could heal, where wild hearts could find peace, and where, if you listened closely, you could hear hope thundering across the fields on the hooves of a Mustang and his star-marked filly. The sanctuary grew in ways Harper had never imagined. What started as an act of desperate kindness became the heart of a movement, a living symbol of hope for all who visited. More wild Mustangs were brought in by animal control, some thin and wild-eyed, others battered from years on the run. Harper never turned them away, with Sentinel and Star leading by example. Even the most frightened new arrivals found comfort and belonging among the herd. As spring gave way to summer, the land bloomed with new grass, wildflowers, and the energy of fresh beginnings. Harper found herself surrounded by people who, like her, had once lost something: family, purpose, a sense of home. Now, they were finding it together. Each evening after chores, The volunteers would gather under the cottonwoods behind the barn. They swapped stories, shared jokes, sometimes played an old guitar. Star, now sturdy and graceful, would roam among them, accepting pats and apples with calm confidence. Sentinel kept his watchful distance, but even he had softened, allowing the bravest children to stroke his neck if they moved slowly enough. But it was more than just peace and laughter. There were hard lessons too, moments when the old wounds of distrust and prejudice surfaced. One evening, as Harper helped a shy new volunteer, Anna, feed the herd, Anna asked, "Why do you do this, Harper? Why keep fighting for animals that the world keeps trying to forget?" Harper paused, watching the sunset throw gold across the paddock. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost. Sentinel Star, me, we all needed a second chance. This ranch isn't just about saving horses. It's about showing people we can change. We can choose to care, even when it's hard." Dr. Sienna Lowe, ever the scientist and advocate, began documenting the sanctuary's progress for a broader audience. She published findings about Sentinel's extraordinary intelligence, how he communicated needs, protected the vulnerable, even taught other rescues. Her research drew attention from universities and animal behaviorists. At first, some doubted the stories. Wild Mustangs forming bonds, expressing empathy, changing the hearts of an entire community. But Sienna brought in experts, and they watched Sentinel lead the herd away from a coyote, or Star comfort a sick foal, and they saw something that couldn't be dismissed. One bright Saturday, Sienna hosted a seminar at the ranch. Dozens gathered. Students, old cowboys, scientists, even skeptical neighbors. With Sentinel and Star grazing nearby, she stood before them with a slideshow and a conviction that reached beyond the academic. These animals are not just surviving. They're healing. They're teaching us what family means. Intelligence, compassion, loyalty. Those aren't just human traits. They belong to all of us. The visitors stayed long after the seminar ended, wandering the pastures, asking questions, feeding the horses. Some neighbors who once doubted Harper's vision now returned with offers of help or quiet apologies for the words they'd spoken months before. One man, Mr. Grady, a rancher who'd argued the loudest against the sanctuary, stood awkwardly at the gate one evening, cap in hand. "I was wrong about you, Harper," he said. "About all of this. My daughter can't stop talking about Star. You've done something real here." Harper smiled, feeling a knot inside her finally loosen. "You're welcome any time, Grady. Bring your family. Let them see what these horses can do." The sense of unity grew. Local businesses began donating feed and materials. A group of high schoolers painted a mural on the barn, capturing Sentinel and Star beneath a spray of wild Nevada stars. Harper saw families arriving with picnics, sitting in the grass as their children sketched the horses, laughter mixing with birdsong. But the biggest change was inside Harper herself. The grief that once shadowed every day began to lift. She found herself looking forward, making plans, dreaming bigger. Where she'd once guarded her heart, now she let others in, volunteers, neighbors, the lost and the hopeful. Sienna teased her about the number of friends she'd gathered, but Harper knew these bonds ran deeper than casual acquaintance. They were a chosen family, drawn together by a wild horse, a wounded filly, and the stubborn hope that healing was possible. One late afternoon, as the sun set in a blaze of red and purple, Harper walked the pastures with Sienna. The horses grazed quietly, Star leading a band of younger Mustangs, Sentinel watching over them from a rise. "You ever think about what comes next?" Sienna asked. Harper laughed. "Every day. I want to do more, take in more rescues, teach more kids, maybe start a program for veterans who need a second chance." Sienna nodded. "You're building a legacy, Harper. one that'll outlast both of us. Harper gazed across the land, remembering the early days, how close she'd come to giving up, how Sentinel and Star had arrived when she needed them most. She squeezed Sienna's hand. None of this would have happened without you, or them. I used to think family was something you lost. Now I know it's something you find, or something you choose. In the distance, Sentinel lifted his head, ears pricked to the wind, as if he could sense Harper's gratitude. Star trotted to his side, her white mark gleaming in the last rays of the sun. The herd moved as one, diverse, scarred, beautiful, a living testament to the truth that trust could be rebuilt, that wounds could heal, that love, once offered freely, could transform a broken world. That night, Harper wrote in her journal by lantern light, capturing the lessons she wanted to remember. Sanctuary isn't just a place. It's the people and animals we fight for. It's the family we build, one act of trust at a time. Dawn came soft and golden, mist curling over the fields as if the earth itself was stretching awake. Harper stood by the porch, coffee warm in her hands, the cool air tingling with promise. The sanctuary was alive with gentle sounds, horses nickering, volunteers laughing as they started chores, the hum of a world finally in balance. For a long moment, Harper simply breathed it all in. There were still bills to pay and fences to mend, but her soul felt lighter than it had in years. Sentinel stood at the top of the nearest hill, coat shimmering silver in the morning light, mane lifted by the breeze. Beside him stood Star, no longer the frail, wounded filly who'd arrived so many seasons ago, but a strong, confident mare. The white star on her forehead glowed, as if it held a bit of the dawn itself. Together, they watched over the herd, a tapestry of rescues, Mustangs, and once lost souls who now called this land home. The ranch had transformed into something greater than Harper ever dreamed. Where before she'd seen a failing operation and empty fields, now she saw a living, breathing testament to trust, courage, and compassion. Children visited on weekends, eyes wide as they listened to stories of wild horses and hard-won hope. Veterans found solace in the quiet rhythm of caring for the animals. Volunteers who'd arrived seeking a purpose left with something even more precious, a sense of family. Harper walked the fence line that morning, boots crunching on dewy grass. She stopped to chat with Mrs. Mendez, who was teaching a group of kids how to brush Daisy, the blind Appaloosa. Harry and Sienna were setting up the community table, already covered with coffee thermoses, homemade bread, and a jar of wildflowers. The mural on the barn, painted by the high schoolers, caught the sunlight, casting vibrant colors across the paddock. It felt like the world itself had conspired to remind Harper, "You are not alone." As the day unfolded, Sentinel led the herd through the open gate, Star by his side, her stride matching his with easy grace. Harper leaned on the fence, watching as the Mustangs and rescues thundered across the pasture, manes and tails streaming like banners. Even the oldest horses, those who'd known nothing but hardship, ran with them, carried forward by the herd's unstoppable momentum. Harper felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't turn away. She wanted to remember this, the sight of freedom, of belonging, of life on its own terms. In the afternoon, the ranch filled with laughter and learning. Children asked questions about wild horse behavior. Volunteers practiced gentle handling with the new arrivals. Sienna gave a short talk about animal intelligence, sharing stories of Sentinel's leadership and Star's resilience. Neighbors who had once doubted Harper's vision now showed up with fence posts and paintbrushes, eager to help. One local business sponsored a second chance scholarship for kids who wanted to study animal care. Another offered free grain for the herd all winter. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky blazed with color, Harper gathered everyone beneath the cottonwoods. The horses grazed nearby, Star nibbling grass at Sentinel's side. Harper cleared her throat, suddenly shy in the sea of faces. But as she looked at the people and animals before her, so many she'd come to love, her voice grew steady. "Some of you remember when this place was just a rundown ranch," she began. "I thought I was alone, thought there was no way to save it, or myself. Then one wild stallion and a star-marked filly showed up at my gate and changed everything. They taught me that sanctuary isn't just about fences or fields. It's about trust. It's about courage. It's about opening your heart, even to the wildest souls." The crowd listened in silence, the moment deep and still. "Family isn't just blood," Harper continued. "It's the people and animals you fight for. It's the second chances you give, and the hope you share, even when the world says it's impossible. That's what this place stands for. That's what we've built. Together." As dusk fell, Sentinel and Star stood at the edge of the herd, their silhouettes framed by the purple-gold sky. Harper watched as Star nuzzled a new arrival, a skinny filly whose eyes were still wild with fear. Sentinel grazed nearby, ever watchful, ever present, the protector, the legend, the heart of their sanctuary. Harper lingered outside long after the others drifted home, lantern casting a warm circle in the cool night. She walked to the top of the pasture, where Sentinel and Star stood side by side, listening to the world. She stroked Sentinel's neck, felt Star's breath on her palm, and looked up at the endless Nevada sky. The stars burned bright, mirrored by the white blaze on Star's forehead. She whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for showing me what's possible." The wind carried her words away, across the fields and beyond the hills. Harper felt something settle deep in her chest, a peace she hadn't known since she was a child. She turned and made her way back to the house, heart full. In her journal that night, Harper wrote the words she wanted everyone to remember. "The bravest families are made by choice, not by blood. When we stand together through danger and doubt, healing and hope can flourish, no matter how wild the world may seem." And so, under open skies, with a wild herd and a found family at her side, Harper stepped forward into tomorrow, ready for whatever would come. Because here, at this sanctuary born of hardship and love, she had finally learned, home is where hope runs free.